Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I just want to let you know we'll begin in just a few moments. Hello, and welcome everyone. On behalf of URI Hillel, I'd like to welcome everyone who is here in person and who is watching on live stream to this afternoon's very special event with Mrs. Alice Eichenbaum. I'd especially like to recognize URI Vice President of Community, Equity, and Diversity, Dr. Sean Rogers, former URI President, Dr. Robert Carruthers, and Director of the Multicultural Student Services Center, Jean Saburemi. We also welcome members of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. We are grateful to the Sandra Bornstein Holocaust Education Center in Providence, and its Executive Director, Wendy Joring, and its Speakers Bureau Coordinator, Michaela Herman, for helping us to arrange Mrs. Eichenbaum's visit, and to our co-sponsors, the URI Chaplains Association, the Multicultural Student Services Center, and the Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies and Dining Services. My name is Daniel Groisman, a junior majoring in biomedical engineering at URI. As a Holocaust Legacy Fellow and a descendant of Holocaust survivors, I had the opportunity to participate in a fellowship program sponsored by the Holocaust Legacy Foundation in the summer of 2019. Along with 15 other Jewish teenagers, I visited Germany and Poland to witness the remnants of the atrocities committed by the Nazis and their collaborators. The experience of standing in the death camps, Treblinka, Majdanek, and Auschwitz-Birkenau gave me an incomparable perspective on the magnitude of this tragedy. The fact that over 2 million human beings lost their lives in these 3 places alone in less than 5 years was overwhelming. As a result, I returned home from the trip with a renewed purpose to preserve and perpetuate the memories and lessons of the Holocaust for future generations. Today, it is an honor for me to introduce Mrs. Alice Eichenbaum, who will share her own story, as well as that of her late husband, Ray. Following her presentation, we will have some time for questions and answers, and we invite everyone for refreshments and more informal conversation in the lobby. So please join me in welcoming Mrs. Alice Eichenbaum.
Thank you. Can you hear me? That works? That's working? Is it working? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you can hear me. Thank you for the introduction. I divide my speech in 2 parts, and you'll see why. I talk about myself, and I talk about my husband. We were more or less the same age. We were at the same time with the same people, that means the German, but in different places, and how different our life shaped. I'll talk first about myself. I was born in Vienna to a middle-class family. I was the only child. My father had a business in Vienna and in Sofia, Bulgaria. We commuted back and forth, and in 1938, March 1938, when Hitler marched into Austria, by sheer luck, we were in Bulgaria. And that's where I survived the war. I always put in a little bit about Bulgaria, and mostly recently, my son was in a meeting, and he was talking to a very intelligent man and told him, my mother survived in Bulgaria. And he says, Bulgaria? Does this country still exist? Where is it? So that's why I feel obligated to tell you about it, a little bit about it. Bulgaria had 9 million people before World War II. Most of them were illiterate. It was a poor country, very agriculture, no industry. It had 1 university. If you wanted to be a doctor, an engineer, or an architect, you had to leave the country and go west. Sofia was a modern city, but the moment you left Sofia, there were not plumbing in many houses and even no electricity in some of it. Bulgaria had 50,000 Jews, that's all. We were not much. I would say 85% to 90% were Sephardim who came in 1492 at the Spanish Inquisition, and all settled in Bulgaria. I was an Ashkenazi Jew. We were completely different. We had nothing in common. We had our own temple, own Hebrew school. Even the cemetery was separate, the Jewish separate. On one side is the Ashkenazi, and the other side is the Sephardim. They spoke Ladino, and I remember even when I had my first date, the first question was, is he a Frank? You know, right away it was when. Life was simple. I went to a private school, a German private school. My father had a very good going business. And Sofia was not a modern, I mean, Sofia by itself was more modern, but Bulgaria, we had hardly any communication, hardly anybody had a radio, hardly anybody had a telephone. So we really didn't know what was going in the West. When 1938, we were issued a German passport. We were Austrian citizens, but we were issued right away a German passport. And I'd still see that passport. It had a J for Jude with a swastika on top. And all Jewish women were Sarah. So myself and my mother, we were both Sarah in the passport. And my father was Israel. But life was simple, and I had a very good youth. The summers we spent on the Black Sea, and then in the woods, or up in the mountains. And because of no communication, we didn't know what was going on in the West. 1938, 1939, 1940, we still had a very normal life. But 1940, we felt that things will change soon. I grew up under a king. It was King Boris III. He had German ancestors. And Hitler needed really Bulgaria as a strategic point to move his troops through Bulgaria to the Black Sea to attack the Ukraine, the Russian. Just, it's not, history repeats somehow. In March of 1941, the German troops marched into Bulgaria, and my life changed right away. First of all, I was in a German school. That day, when the Germans marched in, the swastika started to fly. The teachers came with the swastika, Heil Hitler. I started to be ignored from the teachers. And I remember there was one German teacher, and it was in one of the science subjects, from March to end of the year, never called me to the blackboard, ignored me completely. I was very, very unhappy. I was the only Jewish girl in the class. There was another Jewish boy. And we were together since we were in kindergarten. But all of a sudden, because I was Jewish, nobody would even talk to me, not in the recess. Everybody, like they had a disease. I couldn't understand it. My grades went down, of course, right away. I was so unhappy. But at least one thing, they didn't kick me out right away. They let me finish the semester. When I finished, of course, there was already a quota of 7%. Only 7% of Jewish kids could go into a public school. Me, coming from a private school, had no chance to get in. So the next thing, I had went to a French-German, I'll show it, French Catholic school. The nuns, I was very happy there, but unfortunately, I didn't stay too long. Life started to change. My father lost the business. Jewish people couldn't own business. Doctors couldn't work in hospitals. But everything went always very slow. The Germans were not in charge of us. And the Germans gave the order to the Bulgarian police, and they had to finish their job, but they were not in a hurry to do it. So everything was very, very slow. In March of 1942, see it's slow, we were issued the Yellow Star. And why I show it to you is It was the smallest yellow star we had. It's known in Europe. It was a little yellow star, as you see, with two holes. We had to sew it on here all the time on the left side. Not like these. These were the ones that if you were in Germany, you had to wear that star in the front, in the back, somebody the side, and it said Jude. And it depends where you were. If you were in France, it was Juif. If it was in Poland, it was Żyd. It was at the same time, the next picture. Okay, now this is in the Cyrillic alphabet. Bulgaria have the Cyrillic alphabet the same as the Russian and the Serbs. We had to teach it. That means entrance to Jews is forbidden. That sign went up on all public places. We couldn't go anymore to a movie, no restaurant, no theater, even on streets. The main streets were forbidden for us. If we went on a side street, we couldn't go on the sidewalk. We had to walk on this street. At the same time, there was also a sign that means that means Jewish home. Every home had to have that sign that there's a Jewish home. At the same time, they issued us also coupons. We had less than, I mean, they were not as bad, but we still had coupons. We had curfew. Things were getting every day worse. We didn't know, like I told you, we never knew what was going on in the West. We didn't know. We only knew the West was bad, that's all. Because my mother and father, they had brothers and sisters in Vienna, Prague, and Poland, and the letters were coming back censored, first of all censored, and also we were going on a trip, don't write to us. We knew things were not good, but we didn't know what was going on. But in January, end of January of 1942, Hitler sent his best envoys, Demniker and Hoffman, to Bulgaria. He needed 20,000 Jews for slave labor. The king agreed with that, to give him the 20,000 Jews. So they rounded up 12,000 Jews from Macedonia, which was part of Bulgaria, and part of Thrace, of Greece. But they only had 12,000 Jews, so they needed 8,000 more, which they took from the border lines. They put them in tobacco warehouses. Bulgaria was a big export on tobacco, and it was winter. We had severe winters. We had the winds from Siberia coming in. They kept them there for a few months. Then they were sent on a boat on the Danube from Bulgaria to Vienna. The Gestapo waited for them, and unfortunately, they were not in very good health because they kept them too long in unheated condition and no food. They sent him straight to Treblinka. Unfortunately, only 196 survived. It was quiet, and we knew that something else was going on. The two, Demniker and Hoffman, were still there. We had more restriction, more curfew, less coupons, but I was still always said I was at home. And I always felt, as long as I'm with my parents, I'm safe. It was May. The police came to our door and told us we have 48 hours. We have to pack one suitcase, 50 kilograms per person, and they'll pick us up on May the 27th to go to a train station. We didn't know. Are we going to a train station? Are we going on a cattle car? Are we going on a real train? We didn't know what was going on. Then we found out that Sofia itself, the capital, had 25,000 Jews. What they wanted to do was it the king or the government or the church, which were quite sympathetic to us, to buy some time and to get us dispersed in small towns, and from there, shipping slowly to the west. The first transport left on the 26th. We were the 27th. It was very hard. What do you pack in one suitcase a whole lifetime? And also not knowing where we were going. We had an order. It was a small town, Karnobat, 60 kilometers from the Turkish border. The police came and they picked us up, and we went to a regular train. And there were a lot of people there with the yellow star. It's the first time and my last time I ever faced the Gestapo. They were severe. They were standing there yelling and screaming when the big German shepherds. My parents told me, "Don't you dare tell them that you speak German." And don't forget, we had German passports. We were not Bulgarian citizens. They were checking our IDs all the time. And I know my parents were scared that if they check up on us, I don't know, we'll be transported immediately to the west. But again, I said we were lucky. The British had their bases in Turkey, and they were taking off usually to bomb the railroad stations or the train stations, and the sirens went off, so they had to get the train out of the track as fast as possible. So they put us fast into the train with the yellow star. The Gestapo didn't even have a chance to check on our papers. We got to Karnobat, which was a small town with a big influence of Turkish, because close to the Turkish border, had still a minaret that chimed 3 times a day for prayers, had a Turkish bath. The police didn't know what to do with us. So they cleaned out the school, and we slept on straw mattresses. We had completely curfew, we couldn't leave the building until they got different orders. When more people came in from Sofia, they built, it was like a ghetto. We were not fenced in, if you have seen it, but we knew our boundaries, where we could go and what we can do. We were placed in homes into a certain vicinity, like we were 3 families in a small little room. The house, of course, had no plumbing, at least it had, and no running water, but it had electricity, at least. We had still strict curfew. We had only 1 hour of freedom a day, from 11 to 12. And we couldn't go nowhere, We had to wear the yellow star all the time. The 1 hour of freedom we had, my job was, at this time I was now 14 already, to go to the well and bring 2 buckets of water, so we had something to drink, water, or, do something. My mother had to go find if there was any food left. We got less and less coupons, and I tell you, I still go and think back how many nights I went hungry to bed and not knowing if tomorrow there's anything to eat. But I always felt safe as long as I was with my parents. The police came many times. We had different orders. Sometimes something happened. They took even the 1 hour of freedom away from us. My mother came down with severe malaria. No doctor was allowed to go into a Jewish home. We couldn't get no medication. I came down with a severe case of whooping cough, also no medication, nothing. Life, then one day we got orders that the trains are ready for us to be shipped to the west, to get ready, one suitcase. The next day they came and they said, no, the partisans bombed some of the, blocked off some of the trains are not ready. With things went bad to worse sometimes, but again, like I always said, I was lucky. I was liberated very early. It was September 9th, 1944. The Russians moved in through the Black Sea, through Bulgaria, to go on to attack the German border. After this, we went back to Bulgaria, to Sofia. Sofia was bombed severely. We lost everything. Our house where we lived was bombed. We tried to start a new life, but now the communists took over. And I lost 2 years of schools. 2 years, it was really 2 years of schools. I had to be tutored in mostly the sciences, mostly math and chemistry, and I always said I had a very good tutor that taught me very well chemistry, because later in life I became a chemist, you know. I finished high school. I finished a public high school. The communists closed all private schools, so I finished a public high school. But it was hard for my parents, so most Jewish people immigrated to Israel after 48, when the state of Israel was built. I went back to Vienna. I had, luckily, an uncle who survived Auschwitz and went to study there. I went back to Bulgaria many times, and in spite of everything, I have wonderful memories. My youth was it was a simple youth, but it was a happy youth. And in spite of the bad things, Bulgarians were good to us, you know. They were not as severe to us like you hear from the German parts. I went back many times, even took my children back to see where I grew up and why I left Bulgaria. And anytime when the plane would take off, they would say, that's the last time you hear the Bulgarian language. Somehow I started to cry. Maybe I cried for my youth. Bulgaria, in all fairness, saved all 50,000 Jews. 50,000 Jews. And why Bulgaria never was recognized, like Denmark or some other countries, I always felt because Bulgaria was a very ally to Russians, and so they didn't want to touch them. And also they gave out the people from Macedonia and Thrace. And, you know, only 196 survived, so it left a little blemish on it. I always think back of Bulgaria, and I had a different time, if you think. When I went to the French school, May 25th is a school holiday. We didn't have to go to school, but we had to go in a parade, in a parade. And we had to go on a boulevard, and a big boulevard or something, and there was the king and the queen. I still see them on the red carpet sitting, and we had to turn our heads, you know. So I grew up, if you can tell, under a kingdom. I lived under a dictatorship, and to a certain point, I lived under the communists too. So I covered a lot of aspects of my life. I will go west now and talk a little bit about my husband. He was born in Lodz, Poland. Lodz was the second biggest city after Warsaw, and you must have heard about Warsaw, the Warsaw Uprising. Lodz was renamed by the German Litzmannstadt, and it was called the Polish Manchester, because they had, that was a big textile industry. Lodz had over 200,000 Jews. It was a big Jewish community. He came, he had an older brother, 4 years older brother, a 6-year older sister, parents, grandparents from both sides, a lot of aunts and uncles, and a big family. And he always said his life was fun, and he had a wonderful youth until the age of 10. September 3rd, 1939, Hitler marched into Poland. On September 9th, they were in Lodz. He was 10 years old. And he said, my life changed overnight. As slow things were going with me, as fast they were going with him. Right away, the father lost the business. No Jewish kids could go to school. No, they were all kicked out right away. At least they let me finish my semester somehow. And they were issued right away. A month later, a big yellow star. He told me he wore it in the front. Even 10 years old, they had to wear it in the front, in the back, and it said JIT, that's for Poland. In April of 1930, the Lodz ghetto was established. There were 200 to 20,000 people in that ghetto. He was 10 years old. Sorry. You had to work. He had to work from 8 to 5 in a tannery. They were making belts for the German soldiers. You didn't work, you didn't get a loaf of bread for the week. And at noontime, they would get a hot soup with potatoes, but he said there was more potato peels than potatoes in it. His parents or grandparents couldn't work, so the loaf of bread they had to share with them. After the tannery, they made enough belts, so they didn't need. He went to a woodworking place where they had to cut big planks of wood, whatever the German needed for tables or chairs or cribs or whatever it is. The severe Polish winters and the malnutrition, people were dying right and left. He said there were funerals every day. It was severe. And every day there were new orders and less food and more punishment. The grandparents went first and the parents, but the 3 siblings stayed together until August of 1944. Remember, September, I was already liberated. They started to eliminate the Lodz ghetto because the Russians were moving in already. They put them on cattle cars. If they were on a transport on cattle cars, if it was 12 hours, 24, 48, it doesn't matter. There was no water and no bread, not even no bread. When the first cattle cars left, they told them back that there were signs, save yourself, it's hell. But how could you save yourself? The 3 siblings, now he was 14, 18, and 20, left with one of the last transports from the Lodz ghetto. They didn't know where they were going, but then the train stopped. And the first sign they saw, Arbeit macht frei. That means work makes you free. That's the entrance to Auschwitz. Because there were so many people going through Auschwitz, his train went straight to Birkenau. The next one is Birkenau. This is Birkenau. That's also where the ovens were, ovens were. He always said that he could not forget the scream of people and the smell of smoke and burning flesh. You didn't stay too long in Auschwitz. First of all, the women were one way, the men the other way. It's the last time he saw his sister. They separated her. He never, to the dying day, through Red Cross, anything, we could not find out whatever happened to her. So the two brothers stayed together. He was 14 and 18. You didn't stay long in Auschwitz. Again, it was checking. Were you capable for work? One side. You were not capable for work, was the other side. The other side was the cyanide baths and the ovens, So the two brothers, they left and stayed to work. And every day, a commando came. Of course, they picked the brother. He was 18, and he was only 14, And he was little, he didn't grow in the malnutrition. But somehow, there was another commission came, another day, and they took both brothers to work. He always said they were so kind to us, the Germans, when they took us to work. We got a real shower if we were issued the striped uniforms and the wooden shoes. But before you left for work, they tattooed your number. You tattooed your number. I don't know if we can see it well anymore. No. There's the number, but it's very hard to see. It was B for Birkenau, 10308. The brother was 10307. He said that even when he lined up to take the number, the German, looked at him and said, they need you for work. You couldn't last a day, So the other German said, give him the number, let him die somewhere else, not here. Anyway, they got the numbers. Why they did the numbers were the two reasons. Now you're slave to the Third Reich, and also you cannot escape anymore. They put them in cattle cars, and again, they didn't know where they were going. So they went to West. Even the Americans were coming in already, to a coal mine. Because he was short, they needed him to go underneath there with dynamite to, He said it was dangerous, but after this he could go upstairs and he volunteered to help in the kitchen to peel potatoes, so he got an extra potato for the day, But the brother, being older, he had to drag the coals. There were no elevators, everything. They stayed there from November to maybe March, but now there was D-Day, the Americans were coming in. They put them on a train, and the trains were not going sometimes. So there were days and days on these cattle cars without bread, without water, without anything. They crossed the Austrian border, and they went to Mauthausen. Now, that was another hell on earth. It was a quarry, and you had to go up 77 steps and come down with heavy limestone. He said people just gave it up. They couldn't take it anymore. On that day, but he again volunteered to work in the kitchen, so he got a little potato each. But he always, when he spoke in school, at that moment he would break down. He said a mean German commando officer separated the two brothers. They put him on a train out to leave Mauthausen, and his brother waved his last goodbye to him. The train wasn't going far because, they were bombed. So you must have heard of the Death March. You had to march. If you didn't march, they shot you on the spot. He said he teamed up even with a cousin of him, but he couldn't make it anymore. On April 30th, they slept in the, in the woods on wet grass. They woke up and the German soldiers were gone. Whoever could walk and crawl went up to the highway. And it was the 5th American Infantry Division who liberated him. At liberation, he weighed only 51 pounds, had no family, nobody. He was put in a hospital for months, malnutrition and depression too, realizing that he has no family. After this, he was in a DP camp, that means displaced person camp, and from there he immigrated to America. He was 15 when he came to America, 15 and a half already. Was placed in an orphanage in New York, an orphanage in Chicago, and often from there, he was placed in a foster home in Providence. That's why Providence comes in now. He wanted to go back to school, which he did, you know. He had to catch up with a lot of things. He went to remedial classes, and he was 3 years older than everybody in his class, but somehow he graduated Hope High School, and he said always, I have to make something of myself. If not, Hitler won. He did win. He went into the army. They drafted him. It was the Korean War. And when he got out of the Korean War, you know, he had a GI Bill, and he said, well, maybe he can go to college. But it was very hard for him not having family and being all by himself. He spoke in schools. He made it a point that he had to tell in school all his story, you know, how life is, that you should not give in, that you should, you know, look what I went through, and I didn't give up. And I went and I made something out of myself. He came to study to Europe because on the jail bill, he couldn't live in America. At that time, the dollar was very strong in Europe. And that's where he started to go to school and become a chemist. Every time when he, like I told you, he talked in school, he said, enjoy life, because you never know what tomorrow will bring. Because like they say, yesterday is history, today is a gift, and tomorrow is a mystery. I will stop here at the moment, but I have something personal that I thought to share with you, because he graduated URI many years ago, and he wrote an essay, and I thought to share it with you for.
It's all right. I'll speak loud.
Just she'll write. My friend here will read to you only a few chapters, a little bit of it, and I'll tell you then.
It's from the, well, only 2006, but the Jewish Voice and Herald. Ray wrote a story, wrote an article entitled, "A Man I Shall Never Forget." The following piece was written for an English class at the University of Rhode Island in 1957. The more I think of those black days, the more positive I become that it was he who kept us from falling into the pit of desperation and degradation. With his courage, selflessness, and optimism, he managed to keep our last rays of hope alive. I recall that in the moments of utmost depression, when everything appeared to be at an end, he was the only one of us who still retained faith. I'm sure, however, that in his own heart he knew that our chances of survival were very slim. When the Germans took my parents away and life became meaningless to me, it was he who gave me the courage and strength to go on living. Although brokenhearted himself, he pointed out to me that only by surviving could we prove that our parents' sacrifices and sufferings were not in vain. When our darkest hour arrived, during which we were sent to a German concentration camp, again it was he who gave me the moral support which enabled me to endure living. A wintry night in March of 1945 will always stand out in my memory. A cruel Nazi camp commander gave out orders to which by which we were separated. The group of which I was a member was loaded onto unheated freight cars. We were standing there, a trembling herd, clothed only in some scanty summer jackets, which the Germans were kind enough to provide us with. As the train was slowly pulling out of the camp and I waved my final farewell to him, he pulled his own jacket off and threw it to me. As long as I live, I shall never forget his trembling, frail figure standing there waving. This self-sacrificing and wholly good man was and will always remain as my ideal. He was my brother.
Now, this was written I have the original, just somehow saved. So I thought to share it with you because it's you or I. If I speak somewhere else, I wouldn't, because now it was written September 27, 1956, English 1, E, Team 2. And you can tell, no, I need the other one. The other one. It was written by hand. 66 years ago, we didn't have no computers, and it looks, we didn't even have a typewriter. The English teacher wrote, you have it there.
I do.
It's an inspiring team. This is so moving that comments seems out of place. Correct your spelling. And that was 66 years ago. We still saved it. So this was written by hand, you can tell. You believe it, 66 years ago, and not today? Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for letting me share my life and my husband's life with you. Thank you so much. And good luck to you.
Thank you very much, Alice. Now we'd like to move forward with our question and answer portion. If you'd like to ask a question, you may raise your hand. I'll be coming on with the microphone, and you can ask Alice your question.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to us about it. It's very moving. I had a question. Did you ever, in the years since, ever hate the Germans? Did you ever?
I can't. Can you interpret? Sometimes I can't hear it. Well, that's one thing I can't hear.
In the years since, have you ever felt hate or resentment towards the Germans?
The what?
Do you ever feel hate or resentment towards the Germans?
I still speak German. That's my mother tongue. You know, I can't help it. I can't help it. You know, it's interesting. In one interview, my husband was asked, do you hate the Germans? Do you hate the Germans? Can you forgive them? He says, I don't hate them, because hate is a very strong word. Then I'll be like them, hate. But I can never forget it, never. I can never forgive him for killing my brother, my sister, my family. So that's the same I feel, you know. I don't go out of my way to buy any German products, no. And it's interesting. I have gone back to Austria because, you know, that's where I was born and I had still some family there. But I have never gone to Germany, never. Like, I have no interest. I would change planes in Munich and Munich, but that was it. No. Isn't it? I traveled to all the other countries, but I had no interest to go to Germany. So deep down there must be something, you know.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you. And you look absolutely beautiful, and we're so lucky that you are here to talk with us. I was wondering how you're feeling about what's going on in the world today with the rise of anti-Semitism, and if you are in any way feeling that there are that these are dangerous times in any way comparable, or that we should be thinking about it, maybe a little bit more vigilant than we are, or whatever. How are you feeling about that now?
How do you feel about what's happening today with anti-Semitism on the rise in modern society, and do you feel like we should be looking more towards the past for reminders, and what is your mood on what you
It's
think is
very
happening?
sad. It's very upsetting, you know. Here we thought will be a better world, a more understanding world. I don't know. Sometimes I just don't. I close my eyes like I don't want to know. You know, I can't help it. Now I'm too old to fight it anymore. But it's very sad. But it's life. There's always a hate. People have to find a scapegoat. What did Germany? What did the Jews do to the Germans? Nothing. They needed a scapegoat. And it was good. Out with the Jews. They were bankers. Everybody was a banker. Everybody was always rich. You know? And that's the mentality of people. I worked in a place now. So the downstairs, there was the production. We were upstairs, the lab and the production was. So a girl there, out of nowhere, says to me, the Jews are rich. I said, how do you come up with it rich? She said, nobody's down in production, you know, a blue-collar worker. They're all upstairs. I said, yeah, but we all went to college, you know. But then, again, out of nowhere, she says to me, who's rich? Out of nowhere. I didn't do anything to her. I didn't see her. So I said, how could I be rich if I have to work every day? I went to work every day, you know. But that's the mentality. Somehow, I don't know, we always thought that we were rich. You know. There are plenty poor Jews, too. Believe me. I don't know, but it's a very upsetting situation, you know. What the future will bring, I don't know.
Hi. Can you share the story about how you and your husband met and fell in love?
Can you share the story of how you and your husband met and fell in love?
Yes, I always do this. I always leave it out on purpose. Well, I was doing already my PhD in chemistry. You know, I became a organic chemist, if you want. Well, and he came to at the same university. We were at Graz. Graz is the second biggest city after Vienna, you know, even known as the most anti-Semitic city, unfortunate, somehow. But we had a very good university at that time. Before World War II, had already 2 Nobel Prize winners in chemistry and in medicine, so it was well known. And we met, I always give this as a final, we met in a lab, and it was a chemical reaction. See, I always leave it out. And then, you know, I wanted to go to Israel. My parents were already in Israel, and I was supposed to join them in Israel, but as you see, I came to America. I went with him back to America.
Hi, it's an honor to speak to you today. I'll keep standing. I have a question on behalf of like younger Gen Z kids. We're talking about the idea of history and maybe how things, you gotta look to the past. My question is, what advice would you give to new generation growing up and moving to make the world a better place, perhaps? What advice would you give?
What advice do you have to the younger generation for what we can do to make the world a better place?
To educate them. Education is very important. To educate them, be more tolerant. Don't look at the color of your pigment. Don't look, you know, the only thing is to educate people and to show them a good, that you yourself are a good person, that you're tolerant, you're agreeable. That's the only thing. Just by showing what you are, and you can bring it to them. It's very hard, because sometimes, I don't know why, people are prejudiced for no reason. I don't know. Just they're told, or maybe they feel superior if they're prejudiced against somebody. That's my only feeling sometimes is. They like to look down at somebody, and it makes them feel better. It's so just education. That's why, you know, my husband was so to establish the Holocaust Center, just to educate people, you know, and that show them that the Jews are not all bankers, they're not all rich the way they all feel about us. That's the only way. I don't know. And sometimes it doesn't help either.
Hi. Thank you again for coming. It's such a blessing to be able to speak to you and be able to speak to survivors that we have left. My question is, what was the experience like traveling to America, knowing that the war was behind you and over with?
What was your experience coming to America after the war, knowing that that time is over? What did you experience, and how did you feel when you came to America?
The way I came to America?
Yes. how did you feel when you came to America, knowing that the war was over, and what was your experience, I guess, also in America?
Well, the war was over when, no, I came to America much later.
Yes. But coming to America after the war was over, how did that feel?
Oh, it was some experience. You know, you come from Europe, a completely different culture. My only first day in America was I arrived by boat. I remember it was May 24th. And I arrived in New York. It was a hot, humid day. And I said, oh my God, that's where I will live, and that's humid. That's humid. Because I was not used. Europe has no humidity. Bulgaria was very hot this summer, but no humidity. We had no humidity. So that was my first experience. It was very hard in the beginning, you know. I didn't know the language. We didn't know where to settle. Of course, he only wanted to settle Providence, only Providence. You know, I mean, that's for him was home. Don't forget, when he came, he was 16. He always said he went to Camp Jory with the camp, and he had freedom, and he had enough to eat. So to him, Providence was. It was very hard at the beginning. I didn't know the language. I didn't know the custom. I was still laugh when people said to me, I see you later. I said, yeah, when? I mean, it didn't, you know, it was very hard to adjust. And I took my first job. I didn't know the language. I was only here 6 weeks. But a chemist is a chemist. H2O is the same in every language. I took it as a lab technician to learn the language, you know. I went to night school. They always laugh at me, my kids. I went to night school to learn English. So my husband asked me, what did you learn today? I said, nothing. Why? The teacher wrote on the blackboard with her left hand. In Europe, we don't have this. We're all right-handed. I never saw anybody with a left hand. I was mesmerized there watching. No, it was very hard to begin. The beginning is very hard in a new country. And I didn't know the language, and financially it wasn't easy. My husband went to school, as you can tell. He had no job. But I worked as the lab technician maybe for 1 year. I learned the language quite fast, and I got a job at Brown, at research. I was at research then for 2 years at Brown, which was much better and slowly upward. But it's very hard to accustom to a new, the customs are different, the culture is different, a lot of things are completely different. But today I feel that's it, I'm an American. But I made it a point that I have to, if I live in this country, I'll be like everybody else. I learned to eat popcorn that I never saw before. I went to ball games, I learned baseball, I learned everything. I went to every game. And so today I consider myself an American. Many times people say to me, why don't you go back to Europe, you still speak German? Nah, no way, it's gone. When the plane comes, when I would leave Europe and come up and they say we'll be landing in 1 hour in Boston, I know that's home. Yeah? But it takes time. It's a very big adjustment, you know, for everybody, you know.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out. With that, we have to look at the time and conclude our question and answer session. I do invite you all to come to the lounge outside. We can have some more informal conversation. With that, thank you so much, Alice. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Oh.
I'll take that microphone off of you if you'd like.
Oh, yeah.
Got it? Yeah.